For more on this, we are now being joined by Syed Javed Hassan, who is an economic columnist and former chairman of the Economic Advisory Group. Mr. Hassan is joining us from Islamabad. Sir, thank you very much for speaking with WION.
Thank you very much for having me.
Sir, banks coming to the rescue of banks. First, Swiss Central Bank rescues Credit Suisse. Now, consortium of 11 banks have come to the rescue of First Republic. Is the crisis averted or does it run deep?
Well, we should start with the Silicon Valley Bank. For that, the Federal Reserve had to invoke the systemic risk exception for depositors. Now, let me explain this a bit. The US banks have an insurance policy of through FDIC, where there's about $250,000 of deposits are insured by the FDIC system. Now, it was felt that this would not be enough to avert the crisis for other banks. So for the first time in a long period, the Federal Reserve has invoked the systemic risk exception. So there's obviously a fear there is a systemic risk, and we are beginning to see that, as you've mentioned, Signature Bank, the Federal Bank, all of these things. Now, on top of that, we have had the Credit Suisse debacle. Now, we have seen something like $120 billion of deposits being withdrawn from Credit Suisse. The Central Bank of Switzerland has come and allowed a credit line of $50 billion. Now, it remains to be seen if we have averted the crisis. The noise is the right one being made. The fact that $30 billion have come through the major banks in the US to support the Federal Bank, all of that is good news, but it really remains to be seen whether we have averted the crisis, because there's jitteriness among the depositors. The smaller banks are seeing some deposits being withdrawn. You see one day shares going up, then the next day you again see shares sliding down. So I think it's a bit early to say whether the crisis has been averted. The fact of the matter is the depositors are nervous about the smaller banks all over. And because some of the lending policies have been very liberal, and there's concern that whether these smaller banks will be able to sustain the crisis there is. And as you mentioned, there's the self-fulfilling promise issue, that the fact that people fear that there's going to be a collapse, they withdraw money, and that leads to the collapse anyway. So I think it's good measures that have been taken by the Federal Reserve Bank in the US, the Swiss Central Bank, but it remains to be seen whether the crisis, whether in Credit Suisse or the other smaller banks in the US, has been completely averted.
Sir, will these bailouts that are now happening incentivize risky behavior and, foster what is called too big a bank to fail mentality?
I think we are already seeing some effect of that. The fact that in 2008, the too big to fail phenomenon happened, and there was a major pumping in of liquidity by the Reserve Bank in the US as well as other banks across the world, has probably fostered this attitude towards being a bit careless about lending policies, even though there was strengthening and there was quite a lot of measures taken to avoid it. But the very fact of the matter that we are seeing what we are seeing with SVP and other banks suggests that there has been a sort of fostering of careless policies by the banks themselves. And now, as I said, I do not want to be one of those who actually promote the idea of self-fulfilling promise. I would like to think that the measures taken by the central bank, both in Switzerland and the US and other banks across the world, will now contain the crisis. But the contagion is there. There is fear among depositors, and we are seeing withdrawals. I mean, Credit Suisse, we saw a withdrawal of something like $120 billion of deposits being taken out. You're saying similarly in the US, Signature Bank. So that is the problem. The depositors need to be somehow calmed. We are not sure we have really crossed that bridge yet.
So let's explore that point a little bit further. What does this mean, what we are witnessing now, to the businesses with the deposits in these banks? What should they do?
That's a really tricky question. I would want to advise every businessman not participate in the crisis and not withdraw their funds, especially given the support that we are seeing from the Federal Reserve as well as the larger banks. But having said that, it is for the individual businesses to decide. We do not want to precipitate a crisis, but obviously the businesses and individuals have to take their own decisions. And given that there is some degree of concern about the lending policies and the riskiness of assets there is on the books of many of these banks, obviously every depositor, every business has to take its own decision, and they should be talking to experts as to the health of the balance sheets of individual banks.
Yes. One final question to you. Yes, sir. Sir, sorry. One final question.
We know that Credit Suisse was very careless, and we are seeing the consequences of that.
Yes. Sir, will banks once again get away without being punished for what some call a too risky a behavior?
The problem is that if banks get punished, the whole world gets punished. We all get punished. The economy is going to a slump. There could be a major recession. We have just come out of COVID. So
yes,
while there is an inclination that you want to see better behavior by the banks, we certainly want to avoid punishment, because that would punish all of us.
All right, Mr. Hassan, thanks very much for speaking with WION, joining us from Islamabad with your perspective.